Let's use an
Yes, whether screen is visible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello everyone. Uh, in this lecture, we will continue with the point of measurement. So as you know, the unit number 5 is concerned with measurement of software product with by measuring internal attribute and external attribute. So in the previous lecture, we have seen how to measure the internal attribute, where we have seen how to measure the internal attribute size. Okay. Now in this lecture, I will continue with how to measure the external attribute. So as you are aware about the internal attribute and external attribute, every software product having the internal attribute and external attribute. What is the internal attributes? The attributes are which define the direct property of your software product and which have a direct measurement. So we have direct unique for the measurement of that attribute of your product is called as internal attribute. For example, size of your product, then length of your product, then we have complexity of this product. So likewise, we have direct measurement. Like for the complexity, we have a space and time complexity direct measurement. Then for the length, we have line of codes is the direct measurement. So such type of attribute of your product is called as internal attribute. And we have direct measurement strategy for this internal attribute. But now the second attributes for your software product is called as external attribute. What is the external attribute? These are the attributes of your product which define the obviously the properties of your product, but which are not directly measurable. Means which are not directly measurable means these are the attributes are not. It is not dependent on the single attribute. This attribute, external attributes, are depends on the many characteristics. Okay, so on which this external attribute is depend. So if you want to measure that attribute, we have to measure all the attributes on which it is depend. You have to first measure it. So that's why this is another style we required for the measuring the external attribute. So an example of external attribute is like reliability, software quality, cost of software. Like these are the attribute means which we cannot measure directly because it is depends on the many attributes and the environment. So in this lecture, we'll see how to measure that external attribute. Okay. So the principal objective of software engineering is that we want to improve the software quality. So one of the measurement which is very important in the software engineering, we have to measure the software quality. Okay. And this software quality is nothing but we call as external attribute. So that's why while measuring the quality, we have to measure the thing, but we have to measure the external attribute. But in case of software quality, there is actually debate for defining the meaning of software quality. Like some says that the software quality is a fitness for the purpose. Some says that software quality is a conformance to the specification. Some says that degree of excellence. Some says that is a timeliness. Like this means we have that software quality external attribute. We have a different measurement perspective. So because of which we are unable to define what is the how to measure the software quality. Okay, as per the user interest. So that's why we need, so that's why there's a need that we need to measure a fixed strategy, or we need to follow the strategy for measuring the software quality. And we need to define how that software quality we can measure. So that software quality is nothing but we call it external attributes. So that's why there is an importance in the software engineering that how to measure that external attribute. So these external attribute measurement are the measurement which must take the account both its behavior and environment it exists in. So whenever we have to perform the measurement of external attribute, we have to consider its behavior of that product, and also we have to consider the environment in which we are performing the measurement. Okay, these two things are very important while measuring the external attribute. Whereas in case of internal attribute, when we measure, so internal attributes can be measured objectively. So we have a fair measurement for the internal attribute. But whereas for measuring the external attribute, we have no direct such measurement is available. Okay, because external attributes can involve aspects that are difficult to quantify and often introduced subjectively. Means the external attribute when you want to measure, because it is depends on the many aspects of that external attributes, and we are very difficult to identify on which aspect that external attributes are different, and we can it's very difficult to plot that particular aspect. So in this unit, we have introduces what are the subjectivity by which we can define the external attribute. So basically, our aim is that we have to measure that external attribute, and mainly we are measuring that attribute at the end of the development. Because at the end of that end of the development, we want to measure that external attribute. Okay, so means we have to measure that external attribute is the aim, but the like suppose if you have to measure direct attribute like software size, we can measure the size of that product. But if you want to think about how to measure the reliability of that software, we cannot measure it directly because the software size is the internal attribute which can measured by the lines of code. But the software reliability, we cannot measure this directly. So it is external attribute. And this external attribute, which is software reliability, is depend on the machine environment and also the user who are using that reliability. So you who are using that software. So that's why while measuring the external attribute, we need to consider the environment also. Okay. So that when you measure the internal attribute, it depends upon directly the user. But when you consider measuring the external attribute, there are lots of aspects we need to consider while measuring that external attribute. But if I think about the value measuring the internal attribute, the sum of the attributes also affects to the, like for example, if you want to measure the software quality, is as you know, software quality is the external attribute. We cannot measure the direct, like we cannot measure directly. But there are some internal attributes which also represent the software, which are also affect on the software quality. So such internal attributes which we have already measured through the direct measurement. So that internal attribute which we can use for the measuring the external attribute. So that's why what is our aim of this particular while measuring the external attribute, we have to measure the internal attribute and we have to predict like which internal attribute by which we can measure the external attribute. Okay, so that is we have to maintain, we have to weigh that by which we can measure the external attribute. Like we have to first measure the internal attribute and find out the which are the internal attribute by which we can identify the external attribute. By this way we can measure the external attribute. So that's why in this unit itself we have different model. What is the use of that model? That model has used to measure the external attribute, and that model has defined on which internal attribute this external attribute is depend, and they have defined also the relationship between that internal attribute by which we can measure the external attribute. So in this model we are going to learn the different model. The aim of that model, they have defined the way of measuring the external attribute, and through that model they have depicted what are the internal attributes and what the relation on which by which we can calculate the external attribute. Okay, so this is actually the measurement which we have used for the measuring the external attribute. So next, what are the models are used for? So we actually go with the actually measurement of software quality. So what are the models are available for the software quality? Because in reality, soft quality is the really a composite of many characteristics. Okay, if I consider quality is not directly measurement, it is actually a measure which is it is depends on the many composites of characteristics. So usually we want a model that will depict this composite characteristics on which qualities depend and also it represent the relationship. So that's why while measuring the quality, we want a model, that model which represent on which characteristics the qualities depend and what their relationship. Through that model, once it is defined, through that model, we can measure the software quality. So this there are many of the models are available which are represent the distinction between the internal attributes and external attributes of external attribute. But here, this internal attributes, if I through the model, if I represent the distinction, then what happened? We already spent the time for measuring the internal attribute. Then again, we are performing the same strategy for measuring the external attribute. So better way, once you have measured the internal attribute, that we can utilize for measuring the external attribute. So that the approach we have used in this model. Through that model, we have find out the what are the attribute, what are the notions of component on which qualities depend, and then we have established the relationship in them, and that relation will help to identify to measure the external attribute. So basically with this model there are basically three models are there. The first is the model which by I measure the software code is the early model. So there are many early models are defined for measure the support. Why they got the early model? Because these are the models which we can use through which we can measure the software quality in the early phase. Okay, so there are two models inside the early model, which is for the software quality, and that model is called as McCall model and Bohemian model. So these are the Macan-Boheman model are the software quality measurement model. This software quality model in which the software quality is described using a decomposition approach. So in this model, the software quality measurement, it is described by the decomposition approach. What is a decomposition approach? In this model, we have outside the user view, we have a quality as a measurement, but there are lots of components on which quality are depend. So this model are views on which components or qualities are depend. So in this model, they have used the approach which is called as model builder focus on the final product. So whatever product is developed, they have used the approach which is called as model builder focus. So in which they have identified what are the key attributes of the quality on the user perspective point of view. So on user perspective point of view, they have identified what are the key attribute on which qualities depend. Okay, so once they identify the key attributes, so these are the key attributes are high level which called as quality factor, which are called as high level external attribute like reliability, usability, maintainability. Okay, so these are the key attributes. Once you identify, then key attributes are the high level attributes like your reliability, usability on which software qualities depend. So these are not directly measured. So then these are the attributes are depends on the many internal attributes. So again, it is decomposed into the many internal attributes like testability and maintainability, and by which we can measure it. So these qualities and that are called as quality factor. So these are the quality factors which are measurable directly. So we have direct matrices for, and that attributes are called as quality criteria. Yes, any problem? So
No, sir.
okay. So these are the models which are designed based on decomposition approach. So basically, while you define the model for software quality, there are two approaches while defining the software quality model. The first is called as fixed model, and second is a defined by your own quality model. But basically, these two ways also define the approach called as decomposition. What is decomposition? First, you identify we have to measure the software quality. Then we have to identify what are the key attributes on which quality we have to measure. And then we have to key attribute, we have to identify by the quality criteria by which we can measure the key component. Likewise, this is a decompose approach is used. So again, there are two ways to measure this software quality. One is called as fixed model, and second called as define your own quality model. As name itself given the meaning, what is a fixed model? In which this hierarchy of key factor, quality factor, these are already published. Means they are already defined on which key component we have to measure, and on which key component all the key factors are depend. So the relation between the attributes and their measurements is fixedly defined. So that's why that model is called as fixed model. And what is define your own model, in which we have to decide what are the key component by which we want to measure the quality. Then we have to decompose on which factor that key components are depend. So everything, and we have to establish the relationship. So everything we have to design about the relationship and hierarchy. Okay, in the define your own model as per user perspective. Whereas in the fixed model, the hierarchy between the atoms and the relationship already defined. We have to use as it is. So that's why we have two model approach, which is a fixed model and define your own model. So while modeling, so in the fixed model, what is the approach they have used? So even the fixed model and define your own model, they have used a fixed approach. What is that approach? They have used the approach which is a so as you know, we have to measure the external attribute. Obviously, that external attributes, which is a composite of many attributes. So first you have to capture on the composite nature quality. So ultimate, we have to measure the quality. So based on that quality, we have to first identify what are the key attributes from user's perspective, and that we call as quality factor. So first you have to identify what are the quality factor, that is called as key component by which quality is measured on user perspective. So once you identify quality factors, so obviously this quality factors we cannot measure directly. So again, we have to measure that quality factor to decompose it to further level, and that further components on which quality factors are dependent is called as quality criteria. So these quality factors are decomposed into quality criteria, and we have to maintain the relation with the quality criteria on which quality factors depend. And once you identify the quality criteria, that quality criteria are having the direct measurement, which is called as quality matrices. And that matrices are helps to measure the criteria. Okay, so this is actually decompose approach. So one of the example of this, like suppose the what is key factor of one of the quality is the maintainability. If you want to measure the maintainability, then this is a key factor which you want to measure. So the key fact, so this is a key component which you want to one of the key factor of your quality you want to measure. So this maintainability depends upon the quality criteria. So what are the quality criteria in which maintainability depends is the correctability, testability, and expandability. So these are the three factors on which maintainability depend. But again, this criteria, which is the quality criteria, we cannot measure directly. So we can measure by using the matrices. So this correctability, we can measure the matrices with the fault count and effort. Where the testability, we can measure with the degree of testing and effort. Likewise, we have the matrices and their relationship by which we can measure the criteria. And once you measure the criteria, that will help to measure the factor which we want to measure. And this approach is called as decomposition approach for measuring the maintainability. Likewise, whenever we have defined the model, which is a fixed model or defined by our own model, everywhere we have defined this decomposition approach. So this is general for maintainability, but how these models has defined their own. So we will see the first model, which is the Bohemian model. What is the Bohemian model? In the Bohemian model, the approach is again decomposition approach in which we can measure the software quality. So in which they have maintained the general utility direct utility measurement which we have measured. So see the general utility which measure in the Bohemian is either maintainability and the portability. So the maintainability is again it is different. So in this you have to first in the Bohemian model they have find the primary uses. So what is the uses of this Bohemian model? It is used for maintainability or portability. So then maintainability is again measured through the intermediate construct. So these are the key component on which your primary uses are depend. So once you identify the intermediate uses, then you have to find out the primary construct, which is again these intermediates are decomposed into the many primitive constructs. So on these primitive structures are the directly measurement. So we have the matrices for measuring direct this primitive construct, and that matrices are helps to measure the intermediate construct. Okay, so likewise, we have these levels here: primary uses, intermediate construct, intermediate constructs, primitive construct, and primitive construct are directly measured through the matrices. And such a matrices, so this is approach simple is a decomposition. Outer level, then we have inner level again divided to last level, and that last level directly measured by the matrices. And that matrices values helps to measure the outer level value. So this is a Bohemian software quality model. Second is what McCall software quality model. Again, it is based on the decomposition. So at the highest level is called as use. It is the user point of view. I want to measure it, which is a product operation, product revision, or product transition, by which I want to measure the McCall model. Then this uses are depends upon the main key factors. So what are the quality factors? The quality factors, which is a high level factors by which we can measure the software quality. The factors are usability, integrity, efficiency, reliability, flexibility, portability. So these are the key factors on which your quality is depend. And this key factor obviously it is not directly measured. So that's why again this decompose into a further level, and that factors are called as a criteria factor, quality criteria. So these are the quality criteria on which factors are depend. So once you find the quality criteria on which factors are depend on which criteria, so that relation is shown here. So for example, if you want to measure the usability, reliability, so reliability is composed of criteria: consistency, accuracy, error tolerance, and simplicity. Like once you calculate these criteria for on which the reliability is measured, so by which we can measure the reliability. Okay, so for this measuring criteria, we have direct matrices. So like we can measure accuracy, IO volume, training, operating, this we can measure directly. So once you calculate this criteria value, which will helps to find out the key factor and by which you can measure the software quality. So this approach which is used by this macro model is a decomposition. What is hierarchy? At the user level, at the here at the outside, we have the user level, then we have key factor level, then criteria level, and the matrices. So here macro model is organized by three types. The first is the factor, criteria, and matrices. These are the three level. What is the factor level? Which to specify, which describe the external view of software, which is viewed by user. So the factors. So in this diagrams here, the factors are nothing but on user point of view, what are the measurement criteria for measuring the software quality? So this usability, integrity, reliability, these are the user point of view. These are called as level, which is called as factor level, which is viewed by user. Next, this factor is decomposed into further level, which is a criteria. So here, the next level is the criteria. So what is the criteria level? Which is a which is they describe the actually internal view of software as seen by developer. So this criteria level is seen by developer. It will define on which criteria your factor is depend. And once the criteria is there, then we have a matrices. So they did this level define, they are defined and used to provide the scale and method of measurement of criteria. So matrices define what are the scale and measurement we have for the measuring that criteria. So based on that, matrices will actually measure it. Okay, so these are the three level factor, criteria, and matrices in the McCall model, which will helps to use to measure the software quality. So as per explanation, the software quality factor is decomposed into low level attributes as quality criteria, and quality matrices are the further level decomposition in which quality criteria is associated with the low level measurable attribute. So that's why the maintainability described by the three criteria and four matrices as the decomposition. So through this decomposition, we can measure the maintainability, or we can through the quality matrices. So this is the approach we use in the. So these are the two quality. These are the fixed two model, which is McCall model and Bohemian model. These are the two fixed model for measuring the quality. Next type of way to define the quality is define your own quality model. What is defined by your own quality model? The name itself given the meaning. Define your own model means you have to define your quality model. Okay, which is one of the author has defined this approach. This developed by Gibbs. What is that approach? In this approach, we have ultimate aim. We have to measure the quality, but for that measurement, you have to first identify a design by measurable objective. So you have to first identify what are the measurable objective by which we can measure the quality. So you have to identify what are the measurable objective of your product. So important of this part is that you have to find out the measurable objective. So the software engineer deliver the product to the user, which based on the importance of the different kind of functionality. So obviously in the software we have different functionality which are the very important for this. So you have to assign the priority to that function so that user identify what are the key functionality of that specification. And these are first you have to check. Once you identify the key functionality, you have to check whether they are measurable or not. And once you identify that are measurable objective that we want to meet, so you have to set that quality objective. So this is the first step. You have to identify the key attribute of your specification which are measurable and that are called as quality objective. And then based on that, you have to identify on which attribute this quality objective we can measure. Okay, so once you identify the attribute on which it is depend, that is a decomposition approach, and by that attribute you have to measure it directly by which we can measure it. So this is a diagram shows that we have to measure quality objective, and what are the measurable objectives? The availability and the user friendliness. So this availability and user friendliness are the measurement we can measure the quality, which are the measurable. So based on that, we have direct measurement by which we can measure the availability and the user friendliness. So here in this approach, as you know, quality depends on the many characteristics, but as per user point of view, we have defined which one is important, and that attribute we have to just define it for the software quality. So that is approach which used here is called as constructive quality model. Okay, CO is constructive, QA means quality, and MO means model is the one of the extended idea of your COCOMO model. Is the extended idea of your McCall model. Based on that model, it is defined. Okay, so this is the second type of the model where you can define the quality model is define your own model by setting the objective and by direct measurement. And the third way to measure the ultimates here, we have standard quality model, which is the Bohemian or McCall, and we can define our own model. But obviously, in the while measuring the quality in the software, we want the standard which will be followed for measuring the quality. So in 1992, the from derivation from McCall model, they have proposed one new model which is based on the international standard for software quality measurement called as software product evaluation quality characteristic and guideline for their use. So in 1992, they have defined what are the criteria of which is a standard for software quality measurement. So that criteria is fixedly defined, and that standard number which assigned for that is the ISO 9126. So ISO 9126 have defined the standards for a software quality measurement on which the software quality is defined. So according to that standard, they have defined the definition of software quality. So according to the standard of this ISO 9 product, that depends on its ability to measure the quality. Where it is according to this standard, they have defined this quality is the total characteristics of software product on which the ability of that software product to satisfy it. So based on that, they have defined the software quality. So according to that, the standard, they have defined a 6 factor on which quality is fixedly depend. So quality is decomposed into 6 factor according to this standard. What are the 6 factor on which quality is depend? First is the functionality, second is reliability, third is efficiency, fourth is usability, fifth is maintainability, and sixth is the portability. So these are the 6 key factors on which quality is depend, which is defined by ISO 9126 model. So this standard is fixed on which six component on which quality is measured. So you have to measure this 6 component first. By the set of this attribute, we can measure the quality. So these 6 attributes defined by one standard. What is the 6 attribute? How I define? It is only we have to define these attributes are depend on the set of attribute that bear on that software that each one can consider. So again, these attributes are directly it depends on the set of attribute. Okay, so according to ISO 91 standard, again they have defined the definition for each of this factor. So according to ISO 9126, what is the definition of reliability? A reliability is defined as a set of attribute that bears on the capability of the software to maintain its level of performance under stated condition. So what is the reliability means is a probability of the failure free operation. So what is according to definition of ISO 9126? A reliability is nothing but the attribute on which a reliability is depend, but that attribute bear the capability of the software under the stated condition. So what is the bearing capability of that software attribute under that for by which we can measure this reliability? Likewise, we can measure the probability is a set of attributes that bear the capability of software to transfer from one environment to the another environment. So according to that, they have defined the portability means the changing environment. So they have identified which attribute on which we can define the capability of software to while transferring from one environment to another environment. Likewise, they have defined the attribute of each of these 6 factors on which qualities depends, and based on that, we have to calculate a software quality as per the requirement. So this is a third way of modeling the software quality, which is a ISO 9126, which is a standard quality. So in this lecture, we have, if I summarize with this lecture, uh, if I summarize with this lecture, there we have defined first as external attribute measurement, and in which we have considered software quality. The software quality model actually measured by 3 ways. The first is what we have fixed model, second is the define your own model, and third is what a standard model. So in the fixed model, we have 2 model, which is a Bohemian model and McCall model. And in the define your own model, we have a choice that how to define the objective, and we have decide what are the measurable attribute by which can measure. And third is the fixed model. With third is what standard model, which is 9126 to 9126 is the standard ISO model, which have defined the qualities depends on the fixed 6 factor, and they define how to, and they have defined on which attribute. These are the factors we can calculate. So these are the 3 way by which we can measure the software quality.